Here's a short, powerful hook perfect for YouTube. She always said I was nobody, just a passing face she'd forget by morning. But the night her voice trembled and she reached for my hand, she walked away with me instead. I first saw her on a late Sunday afternoon, the kind of hour when the world feels half asleep, shop shutters half closed, distant traffic humming like a fading thought. She was standing near the community center entrance, speaking to someone with that calm, composed confidence she carried like a second skin. She looked like a woman who understood herself, who didn't need to impress anyone, least of all a stranger like me. And maybe that's why she didn't notice me at first. Or maybe she noticed far too much. I remember the way her eyes shifted past me, not in rudeness, but in a practiced kind of distance, as if she had learned the art of not letting people in unless absolutely necessary. When I walked by, she barely glanced my way, yet my mind replayed that half-glance the entire evening. She had that presence, warm but controlled, approachable but self-guarded. The kind of woman who doesn't walk into a room, she settles into it, like she belongs anywhere she stands. I ended up near her again inside the center, both of us waiting in the lobby for separate reasons. She stood by a window, arms lightly folded, sunlight brushing along the contour of her cheek. Her hair fell in soft waves, slightly tousled as if the day had been longer than she was willing to admit. I didn't speak, I didn't want to be another interruption in her already heavy world, but she noticed my presence this time. Just slightly. Her fingers paused on the rim of her coffee cup. Not a full stop, just a subtle hesitation, the kind that only makes sense when you realize someone's awareness has shifted toward you. She didn't look at me, but the tension in her shoulders eased, as though she'd already understood I wasn't a threat. There was something about her, maybe the quiet grace in how she breathed, or the way her perfume drifted in the warm air, sandalwood with something faintly citrus, grounding yet gentle. It reached me before her words ever would. But she kept her distance. When a mutual acquaintance briefly introduced us, an offhand, "This is her, and this is him," she nodded politely and gave a small smile, the kind women give when they intend not to remember your name. She said something like, "Oh, he's just around here sometimes," her voice smooth and effortless, as if categorizing me in a file labeled not important. I smiled back, pretending it didn't bother me. I wasn't supposed to matter to her. She made that clear. Yet even as we exchanged those brief, forgettable pleasantries, her eyes lingered a heartbeat longer on mine than necessary, steady, curious, then quickly withdrawn, as though she'd accidentally revealed something. And I felt it then, she wasn't avoiding me because I was nobody. She was avoiding me because she had already noticed more than she intended to. That was the first moment I knew this woman, who didn't notice me, was going to change something in my life. I just didn't know how deeply yet. It happened on a weekday evening, one of those mild, undecided evenings when the sky can't choose between sunlight and dusk. I wasn't expecting to see her again, but fate has a strange way of tying two people's paths together long before they understand why. She stepped out of the community center carrying a canvas bag that was clearly heavier than it looked. I didn't rush to help, I knew she was the type who disliked unnecessary attention. But when the strap slipped from her shoulder and the bag nearly hit the ground, instinct took over. I caught it just before it fell. She exhaled sharply, startled, not by the weight, but by the closeness. For a moment we were only inches apart, her hand still gripping the strap while mine steadied the bottom. Her fingers brushed the side of my thumb. Warm. Soft. A little shaky, despite her trying to hide it. "Thank you," she said, voice softer than the one she used around other people. It carried a tired sincerity that made her seem human in a way I hadn't seen before, less composed, more real. "It's okay," I replied. "Happens to all of us." She gave a tiny smile, almost amused. "Not to me," she whispered, half to herself. We walked inside together to set the bag down. It was nothing extraordinary, just art supplies, but the slight tremor in her fingers didn't escape me. I didn't ask. She didn't offer. Some things aren't meant to be pried into yet. Just as she straightened up, a sudden roll of thunder shook the windows. A moment later, rain came crashing down with the impatient force of early monsoon weather. The lobby lights flickered, the air smelled of wet dust and surprise. She stepped closer to the doorway, watching the downpour with an expression that wasn't quite frustration, but not acceptance either. "Perfect," she murmured. "I told myself it wouldn't rain today." "You didn't bring an umbrella?" I asked. She glanced at me, arching a brow. "Do I look like someone who plans that far ahead?" Her tone was teasing, but her posture told another story, arms folded tightly, shoulder blades tense beneath her shawl. She wasn't upset about the rain. She was upset about something else entirely. We ended up stuck there together, side by side, the sound of rain cushioning the quiet space between us. I could feel her presence more than I could explain, the warmth radiating from her, the soft rise and fall of her breathing, the faint scent of sandalwood deepening with the damp air. After a few minutes, she sighed. "I guess I'm walking in this." "You don't have to," I said without overthinking. "I can walk you, at least to the main road." She hesitated, her eyes searching mine with a quiet conflict, the look of someone who wasn't used to accepting help, especially from someone younger. But then her expression softened, the faintest crack in her armor. "All right," she whispered. We stepped outside together. The rain hit us in scattered sheets, cold and refreshing. A strand of her hair loosened and clung to her cheek. Without thinking, I reached out and brushed it back gently. Her breath caught, not dramatically, but in a way that told me the moment mattered more than either of us wanted to admit. And just like that, a simple walk in the rain became the first real conversation between us, the one that shouldn't have mattered, yet somehow changed everything that followed. By the time the rain softened into a misty drizzle, we were already halfway down the main road. Neither of us had said much, yet the silence between us didn't feel empty. It felt attentive. Like both of us were listening for something unspoken. I should have said goodbye once we reached the corner where our paths split. That would have been the sensible thing, a polite end to a polite walk. But she paused before turning, glancing at the dimly lit cafe across the street. "Do you want something warm?" she asked, trying to sound casual but failing just a little. I nodded, and that tiny choice, hers to offer, mine to accept, stretched the evening a little longer than either of us had planned. Inside, the cafe was quiet, warmed by soft amber lights and the scent of brewed coffee. She slid into a booth by the window, choosing the seat that let her face the street. I took the opposite side, and for a moment we simply watched the rain streak down the glass like soft silver threads. "You don't talk much," she said, stirring her tea slowly. "You don't either," I replied gently. She looked up at that, eyes meeting mine with a flicker of surprise, the good kind, the kind that says she didn't expect someone to notice her patterns. We talked then. Not about anything dramatic, just small, harmless pieces of our lives. Her work. My studies. A book she'd, reluctantly, admitted she reread every few years. The kind of conversation that shouldn't carry weight, yet for reasons neither of us voiced, it did. Outside, the city lights began to blur in the damp air, turning the street into a moving painting. The glow reflected in her eyes, softening her usually guarded expression. I watched the way she listened, leaning in slightly, fingers curled around her cup, her attention warm and undivided. At one point, a gust of wind pressed against the window, making her tuck her shawl closer around her shoulders. When it slipped, I reached forward instinctively to adjust it. My fingertips grazed her shoulder, a gentle, feather-light touch. She inhaled softly. Not in discomfort. Not in surprise. In awareness. Her gaze drifted down to my hand for a heartbeat before she looked away, pretending to focus on something outside. But her posture had changed, just subtly, shoulders looser, chin tilted slightly toward me instead of away. When we eventually stepped out of the cafe, the rain had thinned into a cool mist. She walked beside me, our steps falling into an easy rhythm, as if our bodies had quietly agreed on matching pace. A street lamp flickered above us, casting a warm glow that brushed against her cheek. "This was unexpectedly nice," she murmured, almost embarrassed to say it aloud. "Yeah," I said. "It was." She smiled then, small, hesitant, but genuine. A smile that felt like the first fragile bridge between us. The evening should have ended hours earlier. But neither of us wanted it to. And that truth settled quietly between our footsteps, marking the beginning of something neither of us dared name yet. For a few days after that evening, she disappeared into her routine again, slipping back into the version of herself the world knew best, composed, unavailable, self-contained. It wasn't dramatic. Just quiet. Clean edges. Polite messages. Long pauses between replies. If our walk in the rain had opened a small door between us, she had gently nudged it almost closed again. I didn't push. Maybe because something in her silence didn't feel like rejection, it felt like fear, the kind that comes from wanting something you're not sure you're allowed to want. When she finally called me back, her voice carried that same mixture of restraint and unspoken relief. "Sorry," she said. "It's been a busy week." She didn't owe me an explanation, but she gave one anyway. That told me more than anything else. We agreed to meet at the community center one afternoon. She arrived a few minutes late, walking in with a calm grace that almost fooled me, except her folded arms betrayed the tension she was trying to hide. "You waited," she said when she saw me. "Of course," I replied. Her lips tightened into something that wasn't quite a smile, wasn't quite resistance. Somewhere in between. We stood in the hallway for a moment, both of us unsure how to bridge the distance she'd recreated. People passed by, offering polite greetings, and she slipped effortlessly into her composed mask when they looked her way. But each time she turned back to me, that mask softened, even if she tried to keep it intact. She finally suggested we step outside. The evening light was gentle, brushing the pavement with golden streaks. She walked slightly ahead of me at first, but when we reached the door, I stepped aside and held it open for her. It was a small gesture, nothing dramatic. But when she passed through, her shoulder brushed lightly against my chest. The contact was brief, accidental in appearance, but unmistakably, felt. She froze just for a moment in the doorway, not visibly, but enough that I sensed her breath shift. Then she continued walking, pretending nothing happened. Outside, the air smelled of warm dust and early sunset. She found a quiet spot near the courtyard steps and sat down. I joined her, leaving just enough space so she wouldn't feel pressed, yet close enough that the warmth between us hummed softly in the background. "You're patient," she said after a long silence. "I'm not waiting for anything," I replied. "I just like being around you." She looked away quickly, blinking against something, guilt, vulnerability, maybe both. "You don't understand," she whispered. "This, whatever this is, it's complicated." "I know," I said. "I'm not asking you for anything." Her shoulders eased at that, the tiniest shift, but real. For the first time since our rainy walk, she looked directly at me. Really looked. Her eyes carried gratitude, longing, and fear all tangled into one expression. "You're too young, too different," she said softly, almost apologizing. "Maybe," I answered. "But I still care." Her breath faltered. Not because she disagreed, but because she did. And in that fragile quiet, I realized something: her walls weren't built to keep me out. They were built to protect something she wasn't ready to lose again. It was a Thursday evening, quiet, unremarkable, the kind of night that shouldn't have meant anything. I was heading home when my phone buzzed. Her name lit the screen, and for a moment, I just stared at it. She never called at night. And she never sounded the way she did when I answered. "Are you free?" Her voice was low, softer than usual, wrapped in a kind of exhaustion she wasn't trying to mask. "Yeah," I said instantly. "Where are you?" There was a pause, the kind that carries more truth than words ever could. I'm near the park, she murmured. I just didn't want to be alone right now. That admission alone felt like a shift in gravity. When I arrived, she was sitting on a quiet bench beneath a street lamp, its warm glow brushing across her face. Her posture wasn't its usual straight, composed line. She looked smaller somehow, not weak, just human in a way she rarely allowed herself to be. She glanced up as I approached, and something unspoken passed between us. Relief, maybe. Or that quiet recognition that tonight, something inside her had finally cracked open. I sat down beside her without saying anything. Our shoulders didn't touch at first, but the space between them felt thinner than air. She exhaled shakily. It's been a day, she whispered, as if afraid the night might shatter if she spoke too loudly. I didn't ask what happened. I knew she'd tell me if she wanted to. After a long moment, she did. Not in a dramatic confession, just small pieces of truth unraveling slowly. A difficult conversation with her family. A reminder of responsibilities she couldn't escape. The weight of being the one everyone depended on. Things she carried alone because she believed she had to. As she spoke, her voice wavered. Not with tears, but with the strain of holding herself together for too long. I turned slightly toward her, listening with the kind of presence she wasn't used to receiving. At one point, a breeze swept through the park, drifting a strand of hair across her cheek. Without thinking, she tucked it behind her ear, then let her hand fall into her lap with a tremble she didn't hide. I don't know why I called you, she said softly. But we both knew she did. She wanted someone who wouldn't judge her for being tired. Someone who saw her strength, but also her softness. I rested my hand beside hers on the bench, not touching, not crowding. Just offering space. She hesitated for several seconds. Then her fingers moved, slowly, like a cautious truth revealing itself, and she placed her hand over mine. Her touch was gentle, warm, and slightly unsteady, the kind of touch that asked for safety without saying the words. I felt her breath shift, felt the tension in her shoulders loosen as she allowed herself to lean just slightly toward me. Our shoulders brushed, and she didn't pull away. It feels dangerous, she whispered. Being close to you. I turned my hand, letting my fingers lightly intertwine with hers, a delicate, patient gesture. I know, I said quietly. But I'm right here. She closed her eyes, leaning her head just an inch closer, drawn not by impulse but by trust she didn't think she would ever give again. And in that fragile, moonlit moment, her walls didn't crumble, they simply opened, and she let me step inside. The days after that night held a different kind of quiet between us, not distance, but the soft, fragile stillness that comes after two people finally stop pretending. She didn't withdraw this time. She didn't hide behind polite messages or half-hearted excuses. She was present, even if she was cautious. And that alone changed everything. One Saturday evening, we found ourselves attending a small neighborhood event, nothing grand, just a gathering at the community center with warm lights, soft music, and people mingling freely. I arrived first. She came a little later, stepping into the room with her usual poise, but her eyes searched for me before they greeted anyone else. When she spotted me, something eased in her posture, the slightest exhale, like she'd been holding her breath. She walked over slowly, every step measured, as if she was aware of exactly how this looked, and yet, she came anyway. Hi, she said, her voice low, carrying that quiet warmth she never used with anyone else. Hi, I replied, trying not to stare at how effortlessly elegant she looked, the soft fall of her shawl, the quiet confidence in her stride, the subtle vulnerability in her eyes. We talked, the way we had begun to, gently, honestly, with pauses that didn't feel awkward but thoughtful. And as the room filled around us, something natural happened, she drifted closer. Close enough that her arm brushed mine when she shifted her weight. Close enough that I could feel the warmth of her sleeve against my wrist. She didn't move away. At one point, I said something, I don't remember what, something light, something meant to ease the heaviness she carried, and she laughed. Not a polite, restrained laugh, but a real one. It softened her entire face, brightened her eyes. And without thinking, she leaned into me, just slightly, as though seeking a momentary anchor. It was natural. Unforced. And unmistakably intimate. That's when someone noticed, a mutual acquaintance passing by with 2 cups of tea. She slowed down, eyes flicking from her to me, curiosity brightening her expression for a brief moment before she politely looked away. But she had seen. Everyone who looked our way after that saw. The subtle closeness. The warmth in her expression. The way her hand brushed my arm when she gestured toward something. The ease with which I leaned a little closer to hear her in the noise of the room. She sensed it too, the shifting glances, the unspoken questions hovering in the air. For a moment, her shoulders tensed, that familiar instinct to retreat tugging at her posture. I didn't expect people to notice, she whispered, looking down. It's all right, I said softly. We're not doing anything wrong. She looked up at me then, searching, uncertain, vulnerable in the way only truth can make someone. Her eyes lingered on mine for a long, quiet moment, the lights behind her casting a soft glow around the edges of her silhouette. Maybe, she said slowly, maybe I don't care what people think anymore. There it was, not a declaration, not a promise, but a choice. A small, brave one. Her hand brushed mine again, this time deliberately. And she didn't pull away when I gently intertwined our fingers in response. People saw us that night. But more importantly, she finally let herself be seen. It wasn't a dramatic confession. There were no grand gestures, no speeches that needed to be remembered. There was just a quiet evening, the kind that felt like the world had shrunk to the space between us, and finally, she let herself step fully into it. We were walking along the tree-lined streets near the park, the same path we had walked together countless times, each step measured, each pause deliberate. Tonight, though, there was no hesitation in her movements. The tension that had clung to her like a shadow for weeks was gone, replaced by something lighter, something deliberate. She walked beside me without pretense, her hand brushing mine every so often, each touch deliberate, grounding, familiar. At one corner, where the lamplight cast a golden circle on the wet pavement, she paused. I noticed her taking a deep breath, her eyes tracing the path ahead, then turning to meet mine. There was a subtle weight in that glance, the kind that carries years of caution, fear, and longing, and yet it was softened by a quiet surrender. I don't want to go back to pretending, she said softly, almost a whisper, but it carried everything. Hesitation, courage, and desire all at once. I reached out instinctively, offering my hand. It was a simple gesture, but it was filled with meaning. A bridge across the unspoken distance we had navigated for weeks. Her fingers hovered for a heartbeat before she finally slipped her hand into mine. The warmth of her grip anchored me. It wasn't timid, it wasn't testing. It was certain. The kind of certainty that makes you realize someone has chosen to trust you, fully, without reservation. We walked on, hands intertwined, letting the silence speak for both of us. I could feel the steady pulse of her heartbeat against my fingers, the soft warmth of her skin, the gentle rise and fall of her arm as it rested beside mine. Everything about her presence was deliberate, yet natural. The distance we had always kept between us melted with each step. As we reached the familiar bridge over the small canal, she stopped again. This time, she didn't look away. Her eyes held mine, a quiet vulnerability softened by a small, genuine smile. It was the first smile in weeks that didn't hide anything, no hesitation, no apology, just pure, unguarded warmth. I never thought I'd do this, she admitted, voice soft, but steady. Walk away with someone like you. You've always had more courage than you give yourself credit for, I said, smiling back. She laughed softly, a sound that seemed to blend with the whisper of the evening breeze. And then, without any further words, she leaned slightly toward me, letting her arm brush mine, letting her presence settle naturally into mine. It wasn't about ownership, or surrender. It was about choice. And in that moment, she chose me. We continued walking, step for step, letting the quiet of the night surround us. Every glance, every touch, every pause carried the weight of weeks of unspoken longing, hesitation, and discovery. By the time we reached the end of the bridge, the streetlights reflecting in the water below, it was no longer she and I. It was us. She had walked away with me, yes. But more importantly, she had walked towards something she had never allowed herself to trust, the quiet certainty of being seen, understood, and wanted. And as we disappeared into the soft glow of the city streets, hand in hand, it felt like the beginning of everything we had both been waiting for.